Richard Donovan's mansion was the kind of place people drove by just to take pictures. Set high on the California hills, with glass walls reflecting the ocean and a driveway long enough to host a parade, it symbolized everything his billion-dollar empire stood for: success, ambition, and power. Yet inside, behind the polished marble floors and gold-framed artwork, lay a silence that haunted him every day. That silence had a name: Emily. Emily was Richard's only daughter. She was 14 years old, with light brown hair that always slipped into her eyes, and a smile so radiant that it softened even the sternest of hearts. But Emily had been born mute. Not a single word had ever passed her lips. To the outside world, Richard was unstoppable, a titan of technology, a man whose companies designed devices that could connect the world. He spoke on stages, signed million-dollar contracts, and was quoted in business magazines. But none of his wealth, none of his influence, none of his inventions could do the one thing he prayed for every night: hear his daughter's voice. At home, Richard would sometimes sit by her bed when she was asleep, watching her breathe peacefully. He remembered the first time he held her, moments after her birth, waiting eagerly for the cries that never came. Doctors reassured him at first: some babies take a little longer to cry. But as the days turned to weeks, then years, the diagnosis became clear. His daughter would never speak. Emily never seemed sad about it. She found her own ways to communicate, scribbling notes in her little journal, pointing, laughing, and hugging. Her eyes, big and full of life, carried emotions that words sometimes failed to express. She wrote her father little notes like, "You look tired. Don't work too hard. Thank you for pancakes today. I love you." But for Richard, those written words, as beautiful as they were a constant reminder of what was missing. He longed, achingly longed, to hear her say just one word. Just once. One evening, Richard decided to take Emily away from the bustle of his business life. He had a charity fundraiser scheduled in a small countryside town 2 hours away. Usually, he would fly in, give a speech, shake hands, and leave. But this time, he wanted to bring Emily, to give her something different from the stiff dinners and boardrooms she was used to. They set off in his sleek black car, winding down highways until skyscrapers gave way to rolling fields and barns. Emily pressed her forehead against the window, eyes wide, fascinated by cows grazing lazily, children playing barefoot in front yards, and the way the sky looked so open and endless. Halfway through the drive, Richard's stomach rumbled. Emily tapped his shoulder, pointing to a little roadside diner with a neon sign that flickered, Daisy's Kitchen. The parking lot was filled with dusty pickup trucks and motorcycles. It was the kind of place Richard had never stepped into in his life. But Emily's face lit up, and Richard couldn't say no. The bell above the door jingled as they walked in. The air smelled of bacon grease, fresh bread, and strong coffee. The wooden booths were worn smooth by years of families, farmers, and truck drivers passing through. An old jukebox hummed faintly in the corner. It was a far cry from the elegant restaurants Richard usually dined in, but Emily seemed enchanted. She slid into a booth, eyes darting around, drinking in every detail like it was magic. The waitress, a woman in her 50s with laugh lines and kind eyes, came over. "What can I get y'all?" she asked in her warm country drawl. Emily eagerly pointed to the menu, her finger landing on a tall glass of homemade lemonade. She scribbled quickly on her notepad and slid it to Richard. "I want to try this." Richard smiled. "The lemonade it is," he told the waitress. He ordered a coffee for himself. When the glass arrived, beads of condensation rolling down its sides, Emily reached for it with both hands. She lifted it carefully, as if it were treasure, and took her first sip. The taste was simple: lemons, sugar, and water, but to Emily, it was something extraordinary. Her eyes widened. She swallowed, then coughed lightly, as though something had caught in her throat. Richard leaned forward in concern. And then it happened. A sound, so faint at first, he almost thought he imagined it. Dad. Richard froze. His coffee cup slipped from his fingers, shattering on the floor. The waitress gasped, her tray wobbling in her hands. The entire diner seemed to fall silent, the clinking of forks and low hum of conversations vanishing. Emily's lips trembled. Tears welled up in her eyes. She tried again, her voice shaky, unused to the world. "Dad." Richard's heart nearly stopped. For years he had dreamed of this, prayed for this, imagined what it might sound like. And here it was, fragile, unsteady, but real. His daughter's voice. He stumbled out of his seat, falling to his knees beside her, his face crumpling as sobs broke free. "Emily," he whispered, clutching her hands, his own tears blurring his vision. The diner's patrons watched in stunned silence. Some covered their mouths. Others wiped their eyes. The waitress set her tray down and clasped her hands together, whispering, "Lord have mercy." Emily's tears flowed freely, but her smile was radiant. She lifted her hand and gently touched her father's cheek. Then, in the softest, most broken, yet most beautiful voice, she whispered again. "Dad." Richard pulled her into his arms, holding her as though the entire world could vanish and he wouldn't care. For the first time in her 14 years of life, silence had been broken. The man who owned empires felt as though he had been given the greatest treasure of all, a single word from the daughter he loved more than life itself. Richard Donovan sat in the sterile white hallway of the local hospital, his expensive suit crumpled, his face streaked with tears. Hours had passed since the moment Emily had spoken her first word in that diner. The doctors had whisked her into a room for tests, leaving Richard pacing, his heart pounding with both fear and hope. He had spent his whole life waiting for this day, and now that it had come, he was terrified it might slip away. What if it was a fluke? What if it never happened again? Finally, the door opened. Dr. Harris, a kindly man in his 60s, motioned him inside. Richard rushed in to see Emily sitting up in bed, her hair messy but her eyes glowing with excitement. She was clutching the empty glass they'd brought from the diner, as though it were a holy relic. "Mr. Donovan," the doctor began, adjusting his glasses, "this is remarkable." Richard leaned forward. "Is she cured? Will she be able to speak?" Dr. Harris smiled gently. "We can't call it a cure. Medically speaking, Emily was never incapable of speech. Her condition was neurological, tied to severe developmental delays. Sometimes the brain can unlock functions unexpectedly. It could be triggered by emotional shock, by age, or even something as simple as a sensory change." He nodded toward the glass. "That lemonade may have acted as a catalyst. But more importantly, your daughter's determination is what broke through." Emily scribbled quickly in her notebook and held it up. "I wanted to say it for years." Then, almost shyly, she lifted her chin and whispered, "Dad." Richard broke down again, dropping to his knees beside her bed. "I've waited my whole life to hear that word," he said, his voice cracking. He pressed his forehead against her hand. "Emily, I'd give away everything I own just to hear you say it again." Emily giggled, a sound he had never truly heard before. She tried another word. Love. Her voice trembled, broken but beautiful. "You." Richard's chest tightened so hard it hurt. He pulled her into his arms, his tears soaking her hair. "I love you too, sweetheart. More than anything in this world. .. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Richard cleared his schedule, something his assistants had never seen him do before. No meetings, no conferences, no investor calls. His entire focus was Emily. They began daily therapy sessions, where Emily practiced forming words and strengthening her voice. Every syllable was a small miracle. Some days were frustrating, her voice would falter, or she'd get embarrassed and retreat to her notebook. But Richard was always there, encouraging her. "Don't rush. One word at a time. You're stronger than you know." Emily began with small things. Yes, no, hungry, home, then longer phrases. "Thank you, Dad. Good morning." Each word was like music to Richard's ears. He would often find himself crying quietly in the corner of the therapy room, overwhelmed by the sound he had prayed for every night of her life. But something else changed too, Richard himself. The ruthless businessman who once thought only in numbers and profit margins now found himself lingering over simple things. Making pancakes with Emily in the morning. Watching her read aloud from children's books, stumbling through each word with determination. Taking her to the park, where she shouted, "Swing!" for the first time and laughed when he pushed her higher. It wasn't just Emily who had been given a voice. It was Richard who had been given a new heart. Months later, Richard decided to take Emily back to where it had all begun, Daisy's kitchen, the little diner in the countryside. This time, word had spread. Locals whispered about the millionaire and his miracle daughter. When they walked in, the bell above the door jingled again. The same waitress, Mrs. Daisy herself was behind the counter. She looked up, her eyes widening in recognition. "Well, I'll be," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "If it isn't my favorite little customer." Emily grinned and slid into the same booth. She picked up the menu, but she didn't write anything down this time. Instead, she looked directly at the waitress and said, in her soft but steady voice, "Lemonade, please." The diner went silent. Every eye turned to her. Richard's chest swelled with pride, tears already stinging his eyes. Daisy clasped her hands together, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, honey, I never thought I'd see the day." When the glass of lemonade arrived, Emily wrapped her fingers around it and lifted it carefully. She took a sip, just as she had the first time. Then she turned to the waitress, her voice trembling but clear enough for the whole diner to hear. "Thank you." The room erupted in applause. Farmers, truckers, families, all strangers, stood and clapped. Some had tears rolling down their cheeks. Richard pressed his hand over his heart, overcome with gratitude. He stood and addressed the diner, his voice breaking. "I've built companies. I've made billions. But nothing has ever mattered as much as hearing my daughter speak. I used to think success was measured in wealth. But tonight, I realize success is measured in moments like this, moments of love, hope, and faith." Emily reached for his hand and whispered, "Dad." And in that one word, Richard knew the truth. All the money in the world could never buy the miracle of a child's voice, or the love that gave her the strength to find it. Sparkle's moral of the story, the greatest miracles in life are not bought with money, but born of love, patience, and faith. True wealth is not what you keep in your bank, but what you hold in your heart.